Let's talk about formalized tradition versus the solitary seeker.
I should probably disclose my biases up front. That way, you understand why I may sometimes unintentionally deviate from objectivity. My opinion, nobody's opinion, can help being colored by their biases. And so that's why it's important to have that disclosure. So I do tend to be biased in favor of the solitary path. Of course, there's a lot to be gained from the collective experience that you have when you are part of a religious order, or when you inherit that power and that portfolio of ideas and experiences when you are initiated into a tradition or lineage. But I think in a cost benefit analysis for myself, ultimately I'm going to lean toward taking the harder path. And I do believe the solitary path is harder because you make a lot more mistakes and there aren't always safeguards. And so there are a lot of consequences to the decisions that you make. I might also argue that to an extent, the path of every esoteric practitioner must be solitary. I mean, to transcend and to fully come into ownership of your own powers, there are a whole lot of inner demons that you do need to confront and exorcise first. And that requires you to kind of figure it out on your own, in your own time, that no one can really teach you. Either you figure it out on your own at some point and become self-initiated, self-aware, even if you are part of a long-standing tradition or lineage, or you just don't. Even, like I said, if you are part of a lineage and have inherited all of that wisdom and insights and experiences, ultimately the work is very solitary. So, like I said, even if you're part of some like really cool magical lineage in the coolest one in the whole wide world, if you don't do that personal, private, solitary cultivation, I think you'll never really come into your own full capacity as an occultist. Now, speaking in favor of traditions, there's a great deal of wisdom, insights, and experiences, like I said, to be gained in that context. You advance faster, I admit, than if you were solitary. Solitary cultivation is actually a very slow process and one riddled with walking in the wrong direction for too long before you realize, oh shit, I've been walking in the wrong direction. This isn't really where I want to go, or the destination on this path isn't where I want to be. In a tradition, or what Taoists refer to as an orthodox lineage, you immediately gain access to an open channel of power. So you don't really have to develop a channel of power from scratch. You are initiated into and you inherit a channel of power. There's also accountability when you study craft with an orthodox lineage. You're given boundaries, safeguards, ethical codes, that kind of thing that you have to live by, and you're heavily protected and watched over not just by your fellow lineage members and master teachers within the lineage, but also the patron gods and the roster of spirits tied to that lineage. I do believe that group work is a profound experience. I don't think anyone can really deny that. I'm not necessarily comfortable about providing personal stories to expand on that statement, at least not on a public video, but it's certainly something I'm happy to share when we meet one on one. Feeling your own power and capabilities instantly magnified and amplified tenfold during group work is just, I think it can be it can be a very addictive feeling, a thrill that kind of makes it easy to neglect that all too important aspect of development, which is that solitary work. When many or even several practitioners get together in ritual circle to create a collective, seamless channel of energy, it's powerful and more effective. But what you experience, I would argue, that experience is knowledge, it's power, but it's not necessarily wisdom. Even when you're part of an orthodox lineage, how far you ultimately can advance within that orthodox lineage or tradition is still going to be based on your solitary work. So no matter how you dice it, tradition or solitary, no one can hold your hand to cross that all important threshold. To finally cross the threshold, it's still going to be solitary work. I did have an opportunity to join into an established tradition or lineage, but I had chosen not to, and it was actually a really difficult and controversial decision because the expectation would have been that I chose lineage and I chose legacy and tradition. And this is going to make me sound kind of snobbish, like an asshole, if I don't already sound like a snobbish asshole to you already. But this is even knowing that had I joined in, I would have potentially, like very reasonably and foreseeably, risen quite high in ranks within that lineage. But even despite that, I kind of knew that, or I was able to intuit it wasn't going to be for me. I think part of why I chose that tradition wasn't for me is because I've had the interesting privilege and opportunity growing up to observe tradition out, close up, but still on the outskirts, standing along the sidelines. But from that vantage point, I could still see that there were a lot of things about that particular path that ultimately gets very cliquish. I mean, kind of to the point of acting like high schoolers. It can kind of feel like 40-year-olds telling you that you can't play on their corner of the playground because you're not wearing green pants, and only kids wearing green pants can play on that side of the playground, so, you're being excluded. And I also think the secrecy wasn't always for me. There's a lot of unintentional rudeness and exclusion that happens because of certain vows that people take in the Eastern traditions. They, of course, I think all esoteric traditions have this. They have their version of being oath bound. And so, once you're tethered into the organization, there's a lot of things that, even though aren't technically oath bound, like literally speaking, they are connected to something that is, and therefore now suddenly a lot of parts of your personal life, things that are all about you and your identity, you can no longer talk about. And so that was another aspect of tradition that I didn't find to be aligned with my personality, and it was also just disconcerting to me. How I saw it, Orthodox lineages could get you to advance in powers and occult access in ways I kind of wanted to just do for myself, even if I would be slower and I would stumble and trip on myself, or I'd go in the wrong direction. And I know the solitary path a lot of the times can be inefficient, and these Orthodox lineages also impose limitations on you in a good way so that you never sort of stray off path, and you really are using your time and labors and training very productively. Whereas, like I said, a lot of times, admittedly, the solitary path, you're not always productive, and you're not always efficient. And let's not even get into the drama. I'm not even going to try to poke at that right now. But suffice it to say, as much as I love gossiping about other people's drama, I certainly didn't want to expose myself to becoming a target of said drama. And nothing gets you positioned in the eye of the storm like socializing with a large group of occultists. My spells are a lot more powerful than your spells. Yeah, well, I'm more psychic than you. The gods favor me over you, bitches. Oh my god, that Benabel. Who the hell does she even think she is? Totally not legit. Well, at least we can both agree on that. Mm-hmm. Since this series is called Bell Chimes In, to kind of keep me on track of my purpose, I do want to chime in on my own background. So from a very young age, I was exposed to some pretty intense teachings. Pretty much since I was born, or as far as I can remember, I had to do mantra recitations. And then in sixth grade was pretty much when I first started 3-hour long silent meditations. I was forced to sit through really, really long lectures by teachers or shifu from both Buddhist and Taoist traditions. And that happened pretty much since junior high. And oh, I had to learn Shaolin, which, by the way, I'm super awful at, like really bad. It's like I never learned it at all. I'm just so bad at it. Qigong practices was exposed to me. I had to meet a lot of really crazy people, people who, would talk at me about auras and chakras, past lives. They would read into my past lives, tell me things about me that, they said I didn't know about myself. Third eye, energy healing, nirvana, immortality, ghosts, demons, geomancy, divination, exorcisms, necromancy. How to do necromancy? I was like 15. Feng shui, divination, just like anything you can think of. Reading leaves, reading faces, reading, did I say palmistry? Reading palms, just like reading anything, reading clouds, hydromancy, scrying. Like, my mom was really into this kind of thing, and she had access and resources to some really amazing and really cool people. So she would drag us all over East Asia and also all over North America to meet these people and to sit in on these lectures. And, it sounds wonderful, but I don't think I made the most of it the way I should have, because for most of it, I was pretty much a teenager. I just wanted to be a mall rat and like crush on boys and wear fashionable clothes. I really didn't want to do 3 hour sitting meditations. So, it was tough. She would also take me to go see a lot of mediums and shamans, and not only did they talk at us about our own experiences, do readings or what have you, but teaching shamanic journeying, and again, like, to really young kids, it was really absurd. And then later on, as I grew into adulthood and there was the advent of the internet, or at least I had access to internet, I would like Google some of these people's names and be like, holy shit, they have their own Wikipedia page. FYI, on my blog, I do get into a lot more details and personal stories of my childhood and my family, but they're all password protected in what I call a closed circuit. And it's easy to gain access. Again, it's very accessible, but I just ask that, you introduce yourself and I get to know you a little bit better. I think that's only fair. If you're going to get to know me, I should get to know you. So there's instructions on how you can join the closed circuit and gain the password for access to that particular category of posts on my blog. I think it's worth it if you want to get to know me. The entire time when I lived under my mom's roof, I was exposed pretty much constantly to teachers, tradition, and esoteric practices. I was, I was taught and had to practice different modalities of meditation, again at an age when all I really wanted to do was be a normal American kid in suburbia doing normal American things. I really wanted to have nothing to do with all of this sort of these esoteric practices, which by the way was never presented to me as being occult or esoteric. It was always presented to me as a form of necessary spiritual cultivation. So I was learning throughout my formative years, under my mom's close supervision, pretty much inner alchemy and outer alchemy. And I was studying forms of inner alchemy and outer alchemy under my mom's hawk's eye supervision until I pretty much left her nest. Anyway, so after all of that, family upbringing, I think when I left the nest, I really just wanted to be independent and remain unaffiliated. I was supposed to choose to become affiliated at the end, but I chose not to. And it's because I didn't wholly buy into any one path or practice that I had been exposed to. I felt like I wanted to take little bits and pieces of everything that was presented to me and things that I would be able to find on my own. Sometimes, per my experience, in set orthodox lineages, some of these lineages can discourage seeking elsewhere. They believe that when you initiate, you're choosing a set path. Remember, the Tao means the path, and there are many different paths to acquiring the Tao. And when you join an orthodox lineage, you're choosing this very set path that's already been paved by predecessors, Sifu teachers, masters before you. All you're doing is walking that path. So even if it's tacitly or sort of kind of by implicit pressure, you are or you do feel discouraged from exploring beyond that path. And for me, I felt like that just really wasn't something that would align with what I wanted to do with my own cultivation. I do sometimes, I will confess, I do sometimes second guess my own decision. Lineage and affiliation gives you an immediate sense of validation. Whereas when you're a solitary practitioner, that sense of validation is really hard fought for and hard won. No one will hand you your credentials when you're a solitary. You cross that threshold only after you've made a shit ton of detours and mistakes. And so these stripes, oftentimes, that you earn are in the form of scars. So just to be clear, I'm definitely not saying tradition is easy by any measure. As I said in an earlier video, most traditions make you run the gauntlet to first prove your worth. So I think it's fair to say when you're talking about occult paths, whether it's lineage or solitary, it's never an easy path. Group work, especially group work with those you respect and you admire, is incredibly powerful and cathartic. Plus, if you really need to get something done, like move that metaphorical mountain, then group work is probably the way to go. But on group work, I mean, this is kind of a, no, it's definitely a tangent, but let's talk about it anyway. Group work doesn't necessarily require every practitioner in the group to be of the same lineage or tradition. So when group work is done within a tradition, of course, that's something else too. But even group work, where a diverse hodgepodge of esoteric practitioners come together under some united purpose, what happens is going to be incredible. And I think it's a different experience altogether. So even if you are a solitary practitioner, at some point, that sort of group work where there is a solidarity that is experienced through energetic connection and link, it's a really like it's a very incredible and powerful experience, but on the darker side it can also be addictive. Those among us who find ourselves on an esoteric path, I think we're just born different and we almost never fit in with mainstream society, and we spend most of our lives feeling like a social outcast. Though how much effort each one of us decides to put into trying to fit in, that's going to vary. Some own their status proudly as a social outcast, and others continue to try to fight for social belonging. And I think established esoteric traditions, these lineages, are just a way for a group of these like minded social outcasts who are called onto the esoteric path to come together and finally feel a sense of social belonging. And I mean, I don't dismiss that. I think that that's very powerful, and that in itself is a form of magic. And of course, objectively, group work does drum up a lot more energy, a lot more power, so it can be much more effective craft when there is that unity and solidarity. But here's what I want to end on. If you're solitary and privately, secretly pining to belong with an established tradition, understand that maybe the established tradition isn't your path, and your gods are keeping you on a solitary path for a reason, denying you opportunities into an established tradition because that's not your calling. That's not the way for you to come into your own full powers. So when we say know thyself, we also mean implicitly to accept yourself for who you are. Know your karma and know how to work within the constructs of that karma. Maybe the reason you haven't had exposure to opportunities of lineage is because, like I said, your gods are protecting you and keeping you on a path that's closer aligned with your true calling.
Okay, so that was my perspective on tradition versus solitary occult practice. What's yours? Are you affiliated with an established tradition? Or do you count yourself to be a solitary practitioner? Or are you a little bit of both? Bell Chimes In is a video series that seeks to be about discourse, whether you chime in publicly or you just take some time to yourself to think about the topic. What are your thoughts and experiences on tradition versus solitary occult practice?